Maria Rodriguez stared at the alarm clock blinking 5:30 a.m. and groaned softly. Her body ached from yesterday's double shift, but there was no time to feel sorry for herself. In 30 minutes, she needed to be dressed, packed, and ready to face another exhausting day that would stretch well into the night. She quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her 8-year-old daughter Grace, who was sleeping peacefully in the small bed they shared in their tiny one-bedroom apartment. The rent was due in 3 days, and Maria was still $40 short. She'd been juggling numbers in her head all week, trying to figure out which bill could wait a little longer. The coffee maker was broken again, so Maria heated water in a small pot and stirred an instant coffee. She'd been promising herself she'd buy a new coffee maker for months, but every time she saved a few dollars, something else would come up. Last month, it was Grace's school supplies. The month before, it was car repairs that she couldn't avoid. As she sipped the bitter coffee, Maria looked around their small living space. The couch had a tear in the armrest that she'd covered with a colorful throw pillow. The kitchen table wobbled unless you knew exactly where to place your weight. The refrigerator made a humming sound that kept her awake some nights. But it was home, and it was theirs. Maria had been working as a nurse's aide at St. Mary's Hospital for 3 years now. The work was demanding, but she genuinely cared about the patients. She'd always wanted to become a registered nurse, but after her divorce, going back to school became impossible. Between working multiple jobs and taking care of Grace, there simply weren't enough hours in the day. Her ex-husband Tony had left them 18 months ago with a mountain of credit card debt and broken promises. He'd promised to help with Grace, promised to send money, promised to be a better father than his own had been. But promises were cheap, and Maria had learned not to count on them anymore. She pulled on her scrubs, the same 2 sets she rotated throughout the week. They were faded but clean, and she'd sewn up a small tear in the pocket herself. Her white nursing shoes had seen better days, but they were comfortable for the long hours she spent on her feet. Maria had learned to take pride in small things, being on time, doing her job well, keeping her uniform neat despite its age. Grace stirred as Maria was packing her lunch. "Morning, Mama," the little girl mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, baby. Go back to sleep. Mrs. Chen will be here in 2 hours to walk you to school." Mrs. Chen was their elderly neighbor, who helped watch Grace in the mornings for $20 a week. It was money Maria could barely spare, but she had no choice. "Will you be home for dinner tonight?" Grace asked, already knowing the answer. Maria's heart squeezed. "I have to work at the diner tonight, remember? But I'll be home before you go to bed. We can read that book you got from the library." Grace nodded and curled back under the blanket. At 8 years old, she'd already learned to be independent in ways that made Maria both proud and sad. Grace could make herself cereal for breakfast, heat up simple meals in the microwave, and do her homework without much help. The morning shift at the hospital was busy but routine. Maria moved from room to room, helping patients with basic needs, taking vital signs, and providing the kind of gentle care that came naturally to her. The doctors and nurses respected her work, and several had suggested she should consider nursing school. If only it were that simple. During her lunch break, Maria sat in the hospital cafeteria with her packed sandwich and thought about money. Her afternoon shift ended at 3, which gave her just enough time to catch 2 buses across town to reach the diner by 4. The diner job paid minimum wage plus tips, but every dollar helped. The owner of Tony's family diner, an older Greek man named Nikos, had been understanding about her schedule. He knew she needed the work, and she was reliable in a way that was hard to find. Maria could work the dinner rush, handle difficult customers, and still smile at the end of the night. After her hospital shift, Maria caught the first bus heading downtown. She always sat by the window during this ride, watching the city change around her. The neighborhoods got nicer as the bus moved toward the business district. The buildings grew taller, the cars more expensive, the people more polished. Sometimes Maria wondered what it would be like to work in one of those glass towers, to wear nice clothes and carry a briefcase instead of a worn purse held together with safety pins. But these thoughts were brief distractions. She had real problems to solve and real bills to pay. The second bus was running late, which meant Maria would barely make it to the diner on time. She checked her phone, an old model that Grace had begged her not to replace because it still worked for calls and texts. Nikos didn't like it when employees were late, even employees he liked. As the bus crawled through downtown traffic, Maria made a quick decision. She'd walk the last 8 blocks instead of waiting. It was risky because she was wearing her work shoes, but she couldn't afford to be late. Every shift mattered. She got off at the next stop and started walking quickly through the business district. The evening crowd was different here. Men and women in expensive suits carrying briefcases and talking on phones that probably cost more than Maria made in a month. They moved with purpose and confidence like they belonged in this world of glass and steel. Maria felt invisible among them, which was fine with her. She clutched her purse closer and kept her eyes forward. These people lived in a different universe, one where $40 wasn't the difference between making rent and facing eviction. Their problems were probably important to them, but they weren't the kind of problems that kept you awake at night, wondering how you'd feed your child. The late afternoon sun reflected off the windows of the tall buildings, creating a canyon of golden light. Maria had to admit it was beautiful, even if it wasn't her world. She picked up her pace, calculating in her head. If she could make it to the diner by 5 minutes to 4, she'd have time to change into her uniform and clock in on time. As she walked past the gleaming headquarters of various companies, Maria thought about Grace, probably just getting home from school now. Mrs. Chen would make sure she had a snack and started her homework. Tonight, after Maria got home from the diner around 11, they'd have a few minutes together before Grace had to sleep. It wasn't the life Maria had imagined when she was Grace's age, but it was their life. They had each other, they had their health, and they had hope that tomorrow might be a little easier than today. Sometimes that was enough to keep going. The business district bustled around her as Maria hurried toward her second job, completely unaware that in just a few more steps, her entire world was about to change forever. Maria's feet were starting to hurt as she walked quickly down the sidewalk, but she pushed through the discomfort. She had learned to ignore small pains over the years. When you worked 2 jobs and had a child to support, you didn't have time to baby yourself over sore feet or tired muscles. The business district was busy with the usual evening rush. People were streaming out of office buildings, heading to parking garages or subway stations. Most of them looked stressed or tired, checking their phones while they walked. Maria noticed how different everyone looked here compared to her neighborhood. The women wore heels that probably cost more than Maria's monthly grocery budget, and the men carried leather briefcases that gleamed under the streetlights. She was walking past a particularly impressive building when something caught her attention. The sign read Hartwell Industries in elegant silver letters, and the building itself was all glass and steel, reaching up toward the darkening sky. Maria had heard the name before but didn't know much about the company. It was just another big corporation in a city full of them. Near the main entrance of the building, she noticed a man who seemed different from the usual crowd. He was well dressed like the others, wearing an expensive-looking dark suit, but something about him seemed off. He was standing still while everyone else moved around him, and he kept touching his chest like something was bothering him. Maria slowed her pace slightly, her nursing instincts kicking in. The man looked to be in his late 30s with dark hair and a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't currently twisted with discomfort. He was breathing heavily, and there was a light sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool evening air. As she watched, the man suddenly stumbled backward, catching himself against the building's glass wall. His face had gone pale, and he was now clutching his chest with both hands. Maria's training immediately told her what she was seeing, but she hoped she was wrong. The businessman next to him glanced over with annoyance, probably thinking the man was drunk or having some kind of breakdown. A woman in a red coat looked in his direction but kept walking, apparently deciding it wasn't her problem. Another man actually stepped around him, muttering something under his breath about people who couldn't handle their liquor. Maria felt her heart rate increase as she realized what was happening. This wasn't someone who had too much to drink or was having a panic attack. This was something much more serious, and everyone was just walking past like he was invisible. The man's knees buckled, and he slid down the glass wall until he was sitting on the concrete. His breathing was becoming more labored, and the expression on his face was one of confusion and fear. Maria had seen that look before in the hospital, and it always meant the same thing. Without thinking, Maria broke into a run. Her worn work shoes slapped against the pavement as she pushed through the crowd of people who were still ignoring the crisis happening right in front of them. By the time she reached him, the man had fallen onto his side and was no longer conscious. Maria dropped to her knees beside him, not caring about her scrubs or the dirty sidewalk. Her hands immediately went to his neck, checking for a pulse. It was there but weak and irregular. His skin was clammy and had taken on a grayish color that she recognized immediately. "Sir, can you hear me?" she said loudly, gently shaking his shoulder. There was no response. Maria quickly looked around at the people walking by. "Someone call 911, she shouted. "This man is having a heart attack." A few people stopped and stared, but most kept walking. Maria couldn't believe how indifferent everyone was being. In her neighborhood, if someone collapsed on the street, half a dozen people would rush to help. Here, in this wealthy business district, people seemed more concerned about missing their trains. Maria pulled out her own phone and dialed 911 while simultaneously checking the man's breathing. His chest was barely moving and his lips were starting to turn blue. She knew she had maybe minutes before this became irreversible. "What's your emergency?" the operator answered. "I need an ambulance at the Hartwell Industries building downtown," Maria said quickly, giving the exact address she could see on the building. "I have a man in his 30s who's having what appears to be a massive heart attack. He's unconscious and his breathing is very shallow. Help is on the way. Are you trained in CPR?" "Yes, I'm a nurse's aide. I'm going to start compressions now." Maria positioned herself correctly and placed her hands on the man's chest. She had done this before, but never on a sidewalk with dozens of people walking around her like she was invisible. The training kicked in automatically as she began the rhythmic compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted under her breath, pushing hard and fast on his chest. After 30 compressions, she tilted his head back and gave him 2 rescue breaths. His chest rose and fell with her efforts, which was a good sign. "Come on," she whispered to him as she continued the CPR. "Don't give up on me." A small crowd had finally started to gather, though most people were keeping their distance. Maria heard someone behind her talking on a phone, probably calling their office to say they'd be late. Another person was taking pictures with their phone, which made Maria angry. But she couldn't stop what she was doing to tell them off. "Is he going to be okay?" asked a young woman who had stopped to watch. "I don't know," Maria answered honestly, not breaking her rhythm. "But I'm not going to stop trying." The man's wallet had fallen out of his jacket pocket during the collapse, and Maria could see the corner of what looked like a driver's license. She couldn't read the name from where she was, and it didn't matter anyway. Rich or poor, famous or unknown, everyone deserved to live. After what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes, Maria heard the beautiful sound of sirens approaching. The ambulance pulled up to the curb and 2 paramedics jumped out with their equipment. "What do we have?" asked the first paramedic, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Male in his 30s, sudden cardiac arrest," Maria reported, never stopping her compressions. "I've been doing CPR for about 6 minutes. He was conscious when I first saw him but collapsed quickly." "Good job," the paramedic said, setting up their equipment. "We'll take over now." Maria moved back as the paramedics took control of the situation. They quickly hooked the man up to their machines and prepared to transport him. As they were loading him onto the stretcher, his eyes fluttered open for just a moment. He looked directly at Maria, his gaze weak but aware. With tremendous effort, he lifted his hand slightly and reached toward her. Maria stepped closer and took his hand in hers. "Thank you," he whispered so quietly she almost didn't hear him over the noise of the street. His grip was weak, but she could feel the gratitude in it. "You're going to be okay," Maria told him, squeezing his hand gently. "The doctors will take good care of you." His eyes closed again as the paramedics wheeled him toward the ambulance. Maria watched as they loaded him inside and drove away, sirens blaring. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse, returning to their own lives and problems. Maria stood on the sidewalk for a moment, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. Her scrubs were dirty, her knees were scraped from kneeling on the concrete, and she was now definitely going to be late for work. But none of that mattered. She had just saved someone's life. As she started walking toward the diner again, Maria realized she didn't even know the man's name. She probably never would. That was okay, though. Sometimes doing the right thing didn't require knowing all the details. Sometimes it just required being human. 3 days had passed since Maria saved the stranger on the street, and life had returned to its usual rhythm. She was back to her regular schedule at St. Mary's Hospital, moving from room to room with the same gentle care she always provided. The incident downtown felt almost like a dream now, something that had happened to someone else. Maria was checking on Mr. Peterson in room 312 when Nancy, one of the older nurses, poked her head through the door. "Maria, there's someone at the front desk asking for you specifically. Says his name is David." Maria looked up from adjusting Mr. Peterson's blanket, confused. She didn't know anyone named David, and visitors rarely asked for nurses' aides by name. Usually they wanted to speak with doctors or head nurses. "Did he say what it was about?" Maria asked, smoothing down her scrubs. She hoped it wasn't someone from Grace's school with bad news, though they would have called first. "No, but he looks like he's been in the hospital recently." "Maybe a former patient?" Nancy shrugged. "He's waiting by the elevators if you want to see him." Maria finished with Mr. Peterson and walked toward the main desk, wondering who this David could be. As she rounded the corner, she stopped in her tracks. Standing near the elevators was the man she had saved 3 days ago. He looked much better now. His color was normal, and he was standing without difficulty, but it was definitely him. He saw her at the same moment and smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that lit up his entire face. Maria felt her heart do a little skip, though she told herself it was just surprise at seeing him again. "You came," she said, walking over to him. "How are you feeling?" "Much better, thanks to you," David replied. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did. The doctors told me you saved my life." Maria felt her cheeks warm slightly. She wasn't used to such direct gratitude, especially not from someone who looked like he belonged in a magazine. Today he was dressed more casually than the business suit from before. Nice jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Maria made in a week, though she tried not to think about that. "I just did what anyone would do," Maria said, deflecting the praise as she always did. "I'm glad you're okay." "That was pretty scary. Anyone would do it?" David raised an eyebrow. "I hate to break it to you, but about 50 people walked past me that day before you stopped. You're not like everyone else." There was something in the way he said it that made Maria look at him more carefully. His eyes were sincere, not the practiced charm she sometimes saw from patients who wanted extra attention. This felt real. "Well, I work here, so I have some medical training," Maria explained, still trying to downplay her actions. "Are you feeling okay now? No chest pain or shortness of breath?" David smiled again. "You're still taking care of me even now. The doctors cleared me to go back to work tomorrow, though they want me to take it easy for a while. Something about stress and lifestyle changes." "That's good advice," Maria said. "Heart attacks don't usually happen to people your age unless there are underlying issues. You should definitely listen to them." They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to say next. The hospital bustled around them with its usual controlled chaos. Nurses hurrying between rooms, families waiting anxiously, the constant beeping of machines in the background. "I don't even know your name," David said suddenly. "I've been thinking about you for 3 days, and I don't even know what to call you." "It's Maria," she said, extending her hand. "Maria Rodriguez." "David," he replied, taking her hand in both of his. His grip was warm and steady, completely different from the weak grasp she remembered from the sidewalk. "Just David." There was something about the way he said "just David" that struck Maria as odd, but she couldn't put her finger on why. Most people just said their full name when introducing themselves. "I brought you something," David said, reaching into a bag he'd been carrying. He pulled out a coffee from what Maria recognized as an expensive downtown cafe. "I figured hospital coffee probably isn't great, and I wanted to do something to say thank you." Maria accepted the coffee gratefully. It was still warm, and when she took a sip, it was better than any coffee she'd had in months. "This is really thoughtful, thank you. But you didn't need to do anything. I'm just glad you're all right. Could I buy you lunch?" David asked suddenly. "I mean, when you have a break, I'd like to hear more about you if that's okay." Maria glanced at her watch. She had 30 minutes before her next set of rounds, and she usually spent lunch breaks in the hospital cafeteria eating whatever she'd packed from home. The idea of having lunch with this interesting stranger was appealing, but also made her nervous. "I only have a short break," she said hesitantly. "That's fine. There's a cafe across the street that's pretty quiet. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches and soup." Something in his tone convinced her. Maybe it was the way he seemed genuinely interested in spending time with her, not like he was doing her a favor or checking something off a list. "Okay," she said. "Let me just check with my supervisor." 20 minutes later, they were sitting in a small cafe across from the hospital. David had insisted on paying despite Maria's protests, and they were sharing a simple lunch of soup and sandwiches. The place was indeed quiet, filled mostly with hospital staff and local office workers. "So you're a nurse's aide," David said, stirring his soup. "How long have you been doing that?" 3 years, Maria replied. "I actually wanted to be a registered nurse, but life got complicated." "Complicated how?" David asked gently. Maria hesitated. She wasn't used to talking about her personal life with people she barely knew, especially people who seemed to come from a different world than hers. But something about David made her feel comfortable. "I have a daughter," she said simply. "Grace, she's 8. When her father left, I had to focus on working instead of school. Maybe someday I'll go back and finish my nursing degree." David nodded thoughtfully. "That must be incredibly difficult, raising a child on your own while working full-time." "Sometimes," Maria admitted. "But Grace is amazing. She's smart and funny and way more mature than most 8-year-olds. We make it work." "I bet she's proud of her mom," David said. "Saving lives and working multiple jobs to take care of her family." "That's pretty heroic," Maria laughed, but not unkindly. "I work at a diner at night. I don't think Grace thinks slinging hash is particularly heroic." "You work 2 jobs?" David asked, and Maria heard something change in his voice. Not pity exactly, but something deeper. "Lots of people do," Maria said, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "It's not a big deal." But David was looking at her like it was a very big deal indeed. "Maria, you saved my life after working all day while you were rushing to a second job to support your daughter. If that's not heroic, I don't know what is." The intensity in his voice made Maria look up from her sandwich. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't quite read. Admiration, yes, but also something that looked almost like guilt. "You seem to have a pretty good life yourself," Maria said, changing the subject because his praise was making her uncomfortable. "Nice clothes, expensive coffee habits. What kind of work do you do?" David paused for just a moment too long. "Business," he said finally. "Corporate stuff. Pretty boring, really. Everyone says their job is boring," Maria laughed. "I bet it's more interesting than you think." "Some days," David said, but he seemed reluctant to elaborate. "What about you? Besides work and Grace, what do you like to do?" They talked for the rest of Maria's break about small things, books they'd read, movies they'd seen, places they'd like to travel someday. Maria found herself laughing more than she had in months. David was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her answers and funny in a way that wasn't trying too hard. When it was time for her to go back to work, David walked her to the hospital entrance. "Could I see you again?" he asked. "Maybe take you and Grace for ice cream sometime?" Maria felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I'd like that," she said. "But are you sure? I mean, you seem like you have a lot going on in your life." "Nothing more important than getting to know the woman who saved my life," David said simply. As Maria walked back into the hospital, she couldn't help smiling. For the first time in a long time, she had something to look forward to besides work and bills and the endless routine of just getting. But she had no idea that the man she was falling for had an office on the top floor of the building where she'd found him, or that his boring corporate job made him one of the most powerful people in the city. Over the next 2 weeks, David became a regular visitor to St. Mary's Hospital. He would show up during Maria's lunch breaks with coffee from that expensive downtown cafe, and they would sit in the small cafeteria talking about everything and nothing. Maria found herself looking forward to these visits more than she wanted to admit. What surprised her most was how interested David seemed in the ordinary details of her life. He asked about Grace's school projects, laughed when Maria told him about her daughter's obsession with dinosaurs, and listened carefully when she talked about the challenges of raising a child alone. Most men Maria had met since her divorce either ran when they learned she had a daughter, or they pretended to be interested while clearly being uncomfortable with the reality of dating a single mother. David was different. When Maria mentioned that Grace was struggling with math homework, he showed up the next day with a set of colorful math workbooks designed to make learning fun. When she casually mentioned that Grace loved to draw but was running out of paper, he arrived with a whole art kit. Nothing too expensive or flashy, just good quality supplies that would last. "You don't have to keep bringing gifts," Maria told him one afternoon as they shared sandwiches in the hospital cafeteria. "Grace is going to get spoiled." "I like doing it," David said simply. "When was the last time someone spoiled either of you a little bit?" The question caught Maria off guard. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had done something nice for her just because they wanted to. Her ex-husband Tony had been good at grand gestures when he wanted something, but small, thoughtful acts of kindness had never been his style. "I'm not used to it," Maria admitted. "It makes me nervous." "Why?" David asked, genuinely curious. Maria hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Because in my experience, when people do nice things, they usually want something in return. And I don't have much to give." David reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Maybe some people just like making you smile." The touch was gentle, warm, and completely different from the desperate grip she remembered from the sidewalk where they first met. Maria felt her heart do that little flutter again, the one that had been happening more and more often when David was around. "Can I meet Grace?" David asked suddenly. "Maybe we could go for ice cream this weekend like I mentioned before?" Maria studied his face, looking for any sign that this was just politeness or curiosity. All she saw was genuine interest and maybe a little nervousness, like her answer mattered to him. "Okay," she said, "but I have to warn you, she's going to ask you a million questions." 8-year-olds don't believe in polite small talk. David laughed. "I'm looking forward to it." That Saturday afternoon, Maria introduced David to Grace at a small ice cream shop near their apartment. Maria had been worried about how her daughter would react to having a man around, but Grace took to David immediately. He didn't talk down to her or try too hard to be funny. Instead, he asked her real questions about school and her interests and listened to her answers like they mattered. "Do you have kids?" Grace asked David while working on a large scoop of chocolate ice cream. "No, I don't," David replied. "Do you think I should?" Grace considered this seriously. "Maybe, but you'd have to learn how to make pancakes first. That's like the most important dad skill." "I'll work on that," David said solemnly, and Maria had to hide her smile behind her napkin. As the weeks went by, David became woven into the small routines of their lives. He would sometimes pick up Grace from school when Maria was working late, always checking with Maria first. He helped Grace with her dinosaur research project, taking her to the library and patiently reading through books about prehistoric creatures. When Maria mentioned she was worried about her car making strange noises, David arranged for a mechanic friend to look at it, though he was vague about how he knew someone so skilled. But even as Maria found herself growing more attached to David, she noticed things that didn't quite add up. His clothes were always expensive, though he dressed down when he was with them. His watch looked like it cost more than Maria made in several months, though he usually wore it with the face turned inward like he was trying to hide it. He always paid for everything without looking at prices, and he never seemed worried about money the way most people did. When Maria asked about his work, David would get vague and change the subject. "Just corporate stuff," he would say, or "Nothing as interesting as what you do." She began to suspect he had a much better job than he was letting on, but she couldn't figure out why he would hide it. The truth came out on a Tuesday afternoon in the most awkward way possible. Maria was coming back from her lunch break when she saw David waiting by the elevators as usual, but this time he wasn't alone. A woman in an expensive suit was standing next to him, talking rapidly in what sounded like a very urgent conversation. "Mr. Hartwell, you missed the board meeting entirely," the woman was saying as Maria approached. "The shareholders are asking questions, and I've been covering for you for 2 weeks. You can't just disappear like this." Maria stopped walking. "Mr. Hartwell?" She looked at David, who had gone pale when he saw her approaching. "David?" Maria said uncertainly. The woman in the suit turned to look at Maria, then back at David. "I'm sorry, am I interrupting something? We really need to get back to the office. The merger documents need your signature today." David looked like he wanted to disappear. "Patricia, this is Maria. Maria, this is Patricia, my assistant." "Assistant?" Patricia looked confused. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm your chief operating officer." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Mr. Hartwell, chief operating officer. She thought back to the building where she had found David having his heart attack. "Hartwell Industries. You're not just David," Maria said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "You're David Hartwell." "As in Hartwell Industries." David opened his mouth to explain, but Patricia was still talking, clearly not reading the tension in the situation. "Sir, the Wall Street Journal is waiting for your comment on the acquisition, and the mayor's office called about the charity gala next month." Maria felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. David wasn't just some businessman with a nice job. He was David Hartwell, the CEO of one of the biggest companies in the city. She had seen his picture in the newspaper business section, though she never paid much attention to that part of the paper. "Maria, I can explain," David started, but she was already backing away. "You lied to me," she said, her voice quiet but hurt. "For weeks you've been lying to me." "I didn't lie, You just what?" "Forgot to mention that you're a millionaire? That you probably own half the city?" Maria's voice was getting louder and other people in the hospital lobby were starting to stare. David looked at Patricia. "Give me a minute." "But sir, the meeting—" "5 minutes, Patricia. Please." Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but something in David's expression stopped her. She stepped away, though not far enough to be out of earshot. "Maria, please let me explain," David said, moving closer to her. "I didn't tell you because I wanted you to get to know me, not my bank account." "That's not your decision to make," Maria shot back. "I thought you were just a normal person. I told you about my struggles, my money problems, how hard it is to make ends meet. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" "Why is it embarrassing?" David asked, genuinely confused. "Nothing has changed about who I am. Everything has changed," Maria exclaimed. "You've been playing some kind of game with me, pretending to be someone you're not. What was this, some kind of charity project? Feel good about yourself by helping the poor single mother. That's not what this is," David said firmly. "I care about you, Maria. I care about Grace. The money doesn't matter." "The money doesn't matter?" Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's exactly what someone with money would say." She turned to walk away, but David caught her arm gently. "Please don't go. Let me take you to dinner tonight and explain everything." Maria looked at him, this man she thought she was falling for, and realized she didn't know him at all. "I can't do this, David, or Mr. Hartwell, whoever you are." She pulled her arm free and walked toward the elevators, leaving David standing in the lobby with his chief operating officer and a growing sense that he had just lost something much more valuable than any business deal he had ever negotiated. For 3 days after the confrontation at the hospital, Maria heard nothing from David. She told herself this was exactly what she had expected. Rich men didn't really want relationships with struggling single mothers. They wanted to feel good about themselves for a while, then move on to someone more suitable for their lifestyle. But even as she tried to convince herself she was better off without him, Maria found herself missing their conversations more than she wanted to admit. Grace kept asking where her new friend had gone, and Maria struggled to explain without revealing how foolish she felt for believing someone like David could really care about them. On Thursday morning, Maria was surprised to find David waiting in the hospital parking lot when she arrived for her shift. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well, and he was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt instead of his usual expensive clothes. "I know you don't want to talk to me," David said as she approached the hospital entrance, "but I have something I need to say." Maria stopped walking but didn't turn around. "I think you've said enough." "I never meant to hurt you," David continued. "I know I should have told you who I was from the beginning. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." "Apology accepted," Maria said flatly. "Now can I go to work? I want to prove to you that my feelings are real," David said. "Not because I feel guilty about what you did for me, and not because I think you need my help. Because I care about you and Grace more than I've ever cared about anyone." Maria finally turned to face him. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "I don't know yet," David admitted. "But I'm going to figure it out." Over the next few weeks, Maria began to notice David in unexpected places. He was volunteering at the community health clinic, where she helped out on weekends, quietly organizing supplies and cleaning equipment. When she asked the clinic director how they had gotten a new volunteer, she was told only that someone had started showing up and offering to help with whatever needed doing. David didn't approach Maria during these volunteer sessions. He worked quietly in the background, doing unglamorous tasks like mopping floors and restocking supplies. When their paths crossed, he would nod politely but give her space, never pressuring her to talk or trying to force conversations. Maria watched him carefully during these encounters. This wasn't the polished businessman she had seen glimpses of, or even the charming man who had brought her expensive coffee. This was someone getting his hands dirty, doing work that no one would praise or notice simply because it needed to be done. After a month of this, Maria's curiosity finally got the better of her. During a break at the clinic, she found David restocking bandages in a supply closet. "Why are you here?" she asked directly. David looked up from the boxes he was organizing. "Because this place helps people who need it and they can use an extra pair of hands." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." David sighed and set down the bandages. "Because I wanted you to see who I really am. Not the CEO, not the guy with money. Just me." "And who are you?" Maria asked. "Someone who thinks you're the strongest, kindest, most amazing person I've ever met," David said simply. "Someone who wants to be worthy of the woman who saved his life in more ways than one." Maria felt her resolve wavering, but she wasn't ready to trust completely yet. "Pretty words, David, but words are easy." "You're right," he agreed. "That's why I'm not asking you to believe what I say. I'm asking you to watch what I do." 2 weeks later, Maria's world was turned upside down again, but this time it had nothing to do with David. Grace came home from school complaining of a headache and feeling dizzy. By evening, she had developed a fever, and Maria knew something was seriously wrong. The emergency room doctor confirmed Maria's worst fears. Grace needed surgery to remove her appendix, and while it wasn't life-threatening, it needed to happen quickly. The procedure would cost thousands of dollars, money that Maria simply didn't have. "We'll figure out the payment plan later," the doctor assured her. "Right now, let's focus on getting Grace taken care of." As Grace was being prepped for surgery, Maria sat in the waiting room trying not to panic about the medical bills that would be coming. She had insurance through the hospital, but it didn't cover everything, and she was already behind on several other bills. While she was filling out paperwork, a nurse approached her with a clipboard. "Mrs. Rodriguez, the financial office wanted me to let you know that your daughter's surgery has been covered by an anonymous donor through our charity fund. You won't owe anything." Maria looked up in confusion. "That's not possible. I didn't apply for any charity fund. Sometimes donors specifically request to help with certain cases," the nurse explained. "Someone heard about your situation and wanted to help." Maria felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had a pretty good idea who the anonymous donor might be, and while she was grateful that Grace would get the care she needed, she was also frustrated that David had gone around her to solve her problems with money. After Grace's successful surgery, while her daughter was sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed, Maria stepped into the hallway and called David's number. "Before you say anything," David said when he answered, "I know you're angry, but don't," Maria interrupted. "Just don't." "Maria, I couldn't just watch you worry about money when your daughter needed surgery. What kind of person would that make me?" "The kind of person who respects my independence," and Maria said, though her anger was tempered by exhaustion and relief that Grace was okay. "I'm sorry," David said quietly. "I know I overstepped, but I don't regret making sure Grace got the best care possible." Maria leaned against the hospital wall, suddenly feeling very tired. "I can't do this, David. I can't be with someone who thinks he can solve all my problems by throwing money at them. What if I promise never to do anything like that again without talking to you first?" David asked. "How can I trust your promises when you've already broken them?" There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Finally, David spoke. "You're right. I can't ask you to trust my words anymore, but maybe someday my actions will speak loud enough that you'll be willing to give me another chance." 6 months passed. David continued volunteering at the clinic, never missing a weekend, never asking Maria for anything more than the chance to work beside her in comfortable silence. Gradually, they began talking again during breaks, carefully neutral conversations about patients they were helping or projects the clinic needed to complete. Maria found herself looking forward to these conversations, and more than that, she found herself respecting the man she saw at the clinic. This David didn't try to impress anyone or take credit for his contributions. He simply showed up, did the work, and went home. One Saturday afternoon, while they were organizing donated medical supplies together, David spoke quietly without looking up from his work. "I've been thinking about what you said. About actions speaking louder than words," he said. "I know I hurt you by hiding who I was, and I know I overstepped with Grace's surgery. But I want you to know that every day I spend here, every day I get to work beside you makes me a better person." Maria looked at him carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I love you," David said simply. "Not because you saved my life, not because I feel guilty, not because I want to fix your problems. I love you because you're brave and kind and real, in a way that most people aren't. And I love Grace, Because she's smart and funny and she makes you smile in a way that lights up your whole face. Maria felt tears prick at her eyes. David, I'm not asking for an answer, he continued. I'm just asking for the chance to keep proving that I'm the man you deserve, not just the man who happened to have a heart attack on the street where you were walking. You really mean that? Maria asked softly. David finally looked up from the supplies he'd been organizing. I've never meant anything more in my life. Maria studied his face for a long moment, seeing the sincerity there, the hope mixed with fear of rejection. She thought about the past 6 months, watching him show up every weekend, never asking for anything, just quietly being present and helpful. Okay, she said finally. Okay, David repeated, not quite daring to believe what he was hearing. I'd like to try again, Maria said, but slowly, and with complete honesty this time. David's smile was brighter than any she had ever seen. I can do slow, and I promise no more secrets. 1 year later, during another Saturday afternoon at the clinic, David got down on one knee while they were alone in the supply room. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, and his proposal was simple and heartfelt. Maria Rodriguez, you saved my life in every way that matters. Will you marry me? Yes, she said without hesitation. Because by then she knew exactly who David Hartwell was, and more importantly, she knew who they could be together. Their wedding 6 months later was a perfect blend of both their worlds, Maria's close-knit community from the hospital and neighborhood, mixed with David's family and colleagues. Grace was the flower girl, and in her speech at the reception, she announced that David had finally learned to make perfect pancakes, as they danced their first dance as husband and wife. Maria reflected on how a moment of crisis had led to a lifetime of love. Sometimes the best things in life really did come from the most unexpected places.